Hi, everybody. Today we have two special guests, and we have Tom Cronin as well. He's one of the team from Medical Device Academy. Today we're going to talk about cybersecurity testing and how do you select a supplier to help you with that testing. Like, who do you recommend and how do you go about selecting those suppliers? Because that could be very important if you're trying to get a medical device to market. We'll start with introductions. Mohammed, do you want to go first?
Sure. Mohammed Fustok, CyberMed. My background was basically evolved over 15 years at Motorola Solutions, working on mission critical radios and all the security surrounding them. From there, the last 10 years, I've been focused on security around medical devices, as well as some work on nation state cybersecurity defense.
Thank you. Jose?
Yeah, Jose Borquez, also from CyberMed, been around the medical device industry for about 25 years. Started off at GE Healthcare a long time ago after my bachelor's, went back and did a PhD in electrical engineering and computer science at MIT, launched a medical device company after that. So I spent the first 7 years of my career as a medical device entrepreneur. So I know what that life is like. And over the last 10 years, with Mohammed and our third partner, Andres, we've been running Bold Type, which does software development for medical devices, and then CyberMed, which focuses on cybersecurity services for medical devices.
Tom?
Yeah, Tom Cronin, a regulatory consultant at Medical Device Academy. I've been working in medical devices for 12 years. I've worked in large companies and small companies in both quality and regulatory roles, and I've lived through this ever-increasing expectations from FDA on cybersecurity, especially within pre-market submissions and post-market activities. And I've worked on, cloud-connected devices and down to firmware-only devices that are upgradable in the field, and the difference in cybersecurity expectations across both of those.
My name's Rob Packard. I'm the president of Medical Device Academy. And because I am the weakest person in cybersecurity in the conversation here, I'll stick to my role as a moderator for this and ask the questions. But my role is usually explaining to a CEO why the automated testing that they're doing for maybe vulnerability of their software is not enough for the FDA, and they're going to have to do more. And why the documentation that's this thin is probably not going to cut it, and why their device is not nearly as secure as they think it is, and why I guarantee the guys on this call are going to find something that's a vulnerability on their product, and they're going to have to patch it. So they shouldn't get ready to ship just yet. So I don't think you guys will disagree with any of those. But we have a few questions here. But if you guys want to jump in with your own question or comment, feel free. We got an hour here to share with people. And I just wanted to give people some insight into what you need to be looking for when you go to hire a firm. And of course, CyberMed might be a little bit biased, like hire them. And who would we recommend? We'd recommend hiring CyberMed. But there are things you look for, and there's a reason why we would recommend them. And it's not just because they have 1345 certification, which is a nice table stake to get the ball rolling, but you actually have to have a good understanding of what medical devices are and how they work. You can't just take what you know from another industry and think it's going to automatically translate to, oh, this is what I did for automotive, this is what I did for aerospace, this is what I did for the military. The FDA will accept it because they won't. There are some differences in how you present what you've done to make sure your device is secure, and you got to learn the FDA jargon and how that's presented. So I'll jump into the questions. The first question I'm going to actually ask, I'm going to ask to Tom, because he's going to be the most unbiased of the group, and he's new to Medical Device Academy. Not necessarily who would you hire?
It's really understanding that security for medical device of a medical device isn't just taken in by itself. Security of a medical device belongs to the context of the overall medical device. So you kind of have to understand how medical devices themselves are defined, how risks are established within them, their design, architecture, and then how does security play a role into that. So having a company that understands the workflow of creating a medical device is a very good starting point to vetting them in understanding how security fits into that. And FDA expects that to be the case. They expect that cybersecurity is a part of your software development approach, not some bolt-on additional thing that was done at the end. So that would be kind of my take, would be start with someone with a deep understanding of what does it take to create and clear a medical device, and then how does security fit into all of that. I don't know, Jose, if you want to add.
Yeah, no, to piggyback on that, I mean, I would say, the world of medical device cybersecurity brings together multiple different fields, right? So it brings together the field of just regulatory affairs in general for medical devices. Of course, it brings the field of cybersecurity. It even brings in the field of just product development and understanding generally what that life cycle looks like. Even things like human factors engineering, right? So understanding that when you're developing a medical device, you're trading things off between, you can make a device extremely secure and then unusable or really painful to use. Well, you don't want to do that, right? Understanding, as I think Mohammed was alluding to this, when you implement a security control, what implications might that have to the safety of the medical device? Or understanding that a cybersecurity risk analysis is not the same as your standard ISO 14971, kind of safety focused risk analysis. So, in our experience, there's kind of maybe three different backgrounds that you see in companies that provide cybersecurity services to medical device companies. One of them is they just come from the security field. So maybe they grew up in the finance security field and thought, okay, there might be an opportunity in medical devices, so they come into it. So it's just not in their DNA, right? It's not in their culture to understand that medical devices have their own unique challenges. I think a second field is maybe they come more from the regulatory world and they don't have the security in their DNA. Or maybe they don't have the product development piece, because when they come from security. So it's what I think we offer and what I would be looking for if I was, back in my entrepreneur medical device startup founder days, would be a company that really holistically understood what are the challenges. And then I'd say the second thing would be, we work with a lot of startups, so it's going to be a little bit different if it's startups versus larger, more established companies where time to market is so critical, right? So if you're just getting a report, well, first of all, if it takes your partner 3 months to get back a report to you, that's a problem, right? So you want to work with somebody who can be fast and responsive. Secondly, if they just send you reports like, here's everything that's wrong with your system, good luck, right? That's not as helpful as somebody who's going to come back and say, hey, here's 7 vulnerabilities that we found that are really important to address, and here's some recommendations on how you might go and address those quickly. That's obviously going to be better. So really finding a partner that has a culture that's really understands your medical device company, understands you have an urgency to get to market, and is there to help.
We had some questions that we came up with in advance to prepare for this. And one of them was, what are the differences between a medical device security and consumer products consumer, like a handheld game? Because they're both going to have wireless, they're both going to have software and firmware, they're both going to have USB ports, they're both going to have cloud services. And the first thing that comes to my mind is almost everything that is a medical device that has security issues, it's because it's communicating data that's patient data, monitoring data, it's HIPAA patient protected information. So that's the first thing. The data that you're trying to protect, it's different from financial data. It's different from my credit card for my game account. It's different. There's a different volume to it. There's a different frequency of it. It's going to a different location and get shared with different people. But other than the data itself, or if you want to expand on that, that's fine. But can you think of other key differences that people need to understand, even people that are security professionals that are not in the medical device space? Mohammed? you can.
Sure. Yeah, and Tom actually touched on this as well. So when you talk about data, there's sort of two sides to the data. Just if you stay with data, and I'm going to mention something else in addition. If you stay with data, for instance, a diagnostic device, you obviously have patient-sensitive information that could be transmitted, and that is similar to sort of account information on a consumer device. So that devices, you have to now consider the control of those devices. And where security comes in is, for instance, how do you make sure that the right person is sending the right settings to the device? How do you make sure that the right person is the one that's updating therapies, et cetera? And so now there's that aspect that you have to consider, which is seldom a concern on the consumer side. And I would then say that sort of the final aspect of the difference between them is on the consumer side, you're really concerned with sort of the consumer's perception of things. And many companies take this approach of, as long as they can manage the perception, they can do in-field updates, et cetera, and that's all okay. On the medical device side, you're concerned with the safety side of patients. And it's not okay to just say a medical device can be unsafe and we'll just worry about upgrading it next month. So you're taking this much more proactive view of ensuring that security is in place to prevent any safety issues, as opposed to just worrying about, do I have an update mechanism to deal with it later? I'll stop.
Okay. Jose?
Yeah, no, agree with all of that. And, you know, you're typically thinking in cybersecurity, like confidentiality, of course, is really important. And as Mohammed mentioned, integrity, but even like availability, right? So if you've got a patient monitor in a hospital and a hack that comes in and the attack is actually pervasive across all of the monitors in the hospital, well, that lack of availability of the equipment can result in serious injury to patients, right? So there's some of the implications of having security vulnerabilities and security events related to medical devices are just higher. Like, you know, you're not talking about somebody being inconvenienced. You're talking about somebody potentially experiencing significant harm or death. So you're just kind of playing for higher stakes. I'd say another difference is that, you know, in the cybersecurity world, a lot of the things that are protected tend to be around cloud or even apps. But in the medical device world, you're working a lot with embedded systems, right? And there's significant security, or there's some nuanced security implications to that, to securing embedded devices where perhaps you don't have as much memory, perhaps the security hardware that's in place is different. And then also just like, how do you properly perform penetration testing, fuzz testing on a physical device, you know, an embedded device that maybe has Bluetooth or Wi-Fi or USB. That tends to be different than what a lot of cybersecurity firms out there are accustomed to testing.
I think one of the things that comes up a lot when people are talking about the pen testing, do we need to test this in the environment that it's going to be installed? Because it's going to probably be in a network environment in a hospital. How are we going to simulate that for pen testing when we do some sort of attack on it? And people need to remember why we have these regulations now. It wasn't a slow evolution that we gradually added this on. It was a knee-jerk reaction to, we had the WannaCry scandal, and we had hospitals that had to say, sorry, we can't accept these ambulances. We can't accept these patients. We can't treat you right now because our system is down due to a ransomware attack. And that's not necessarily an extreme example. You connect to the hospital infrastructure and you infect everything there. And there might be some things that are immune because they were well designed to be hardened, but all the data for the hospitals in the network. So you infect the network, you've compromised everything there. Tom, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, exactly that, Rob, about the use environment. And I wonder, you know, Jose or Mohammed, if you have some insight into, you know, how does that influence the attack surfaces that you consider when you're doing threat modeling for, say, a consumer good product versus a medical device?
Yeah, I mean, all good points. So let me flip it. I actually, again, mentioned two sides to this. So let's start with, you're creating a medical device that's going to be in an environment that you don't control. And a hospital network you can't control. the general approach we lean towards is more of a zero trust model, where you say, fundamentally, I have to manage whatever it is that I can't control. So you can't rely on the fact that you're in a secure network, for instance, and just expose everything. You have to assume that it's not a controlled network and that you could be attacked from that network. So basically, that's the approach that we most generally lean towards, is to say, don't make the assumption. It's a bad assumption that you're going to be in a trusted network, and take a much stronger zero trust posture in how you approach things. That's on that side. Now there's also the flip side, which is hospitals and any environment where your medical device is going to be have become much more sensitive now to the threat of your medical device being effectively a Trojan horse or a methodology of attack into their network. So it's becoming more just as important to be able to convince a client that's going to deploy this that you are not going to affect their network, as it is for you to make sure that they're not going to affect you. So you have to look at this from both sides. And so that's another sort of difference you think about in terms of medical devices. You really have to consider that. I don't know that it is now that can be helpful too, because you don't have to recreate the hospital's network to be able to perform testing. You just have to assume that no network outside is trustworthy, and you that way can test and make sure it works regardless of where it is. Because again, you can't always control the environment outside.
Yeah. Yeah, and to Mohammed's point, by the way, like we get clients who come to us, and it's not just that FDA has these significant requirements around cybersecurity since 524B was added to the FD&C Act, and the guidance from FDA came out in 2023. It's like that's reason enough for any medical device company to take cybersecurity seriously, because they literally can't pass go, right? They won't get cleared if they don't have proper assurance for FDA that their system is secure. But if that wasn't sufficient reason, what you'll find is that, especially if you're developing a medical device that's ultimately going to end up in a hospital, these hospitals are now sending you questionnaires that are as much data, sometimes more. They're looking for more information than what FDA is looking for. Because precisely as Mohammed said, like the last thing they want is to bring insecure devices into their network that are going to put them at greater harm. And also they want to know things, for example, like, what is it going to look like if we need to patch your device? I was talking to a hospital cybersecurity staff member not too long ago, and he was saying that they spend like 80% of their time going around the hospital with thumb drives, updating, devices to patch them. So they might be interested to know, like, do you have a more efficient means of securely updating your medical devices in the field, which is a requirement from FDA, that you have a mechanism in place to update and patch medical devices in the field. So it's not just the regulatory piece, and it's not just the kind of the technical nuances of being in that kind of environment. There's very significant business implications to implementing things correctly.
And if I may just add to that, I mean, having spoken to hospital group CSOs, the posture that they're not standing still, obviously, they have to deal with security on their side. And the posture they're generally taking is to say, if they're not confident of a medical device being truly secure and safe to put in their networks, they isolate the network. So you can be designing a product believing that we're going to go into a hospital, we're going to be able to send our data out so that other equipment can coordinate with it, or it can reach all the right people, and suddenly find yourself in a situation where you're just put in a network that's completely isolated and you can't reach anything. And at that point, what do you do? So this has direct business implications to medical device manufacturers in terms of how they're even allowed to deploy their devices in areas like hospitals and hospital groups.
One of the things that, go ahead, Tom.
As you say, yeah, this is very insightful too, that you're providing examples of how your expertise is also from the purchasing organization as well. And I'm wondering, how would you handle a client scenario where they do their threat model, security risk assessment, their vulnerability scans, but they're not able to have independence of penetration testing, so they partner with an agency like you, and all of their security analysis say we have low risk because we just transfer the responsibility of security on to the end user, and we're going to have a security manual that tells them how to configure the device. And you said timeliness is important with medical devices. We're looking to submit to the FDA, within the next couple months. How would you work with a client in that scenario?
Yeah, so I mean, we run into those situations, and first off, when you're looking at this as an independent tester, you can't be biased. You have to see what's really there. I mean, we're not going to prejudge the end results based on sort of what a client believes they want the answer to be. So you've got to start from the position of what truly are the vulnerabilities. Once you have those, then and assuming that something comes up that is perhaps unacceptable as a vulnerability, just at its face, and if we're just involved only on the testing side, the conversation then turns to things like compensating controls. Well, what we can accept perhaps this vulnerability under these conditions. What should be put in place to allow the device to remain safe, be able to convince FDA that this is going to be safe and the device is going to be reliable and operate accurately, despite this vulnerability. It isn't always easy. I don't like necessarily being the bearer of bad news in these situations when somebody wants to just rush through FDA. But I would offer it the other way around, is if you, let's look at the worst case scenario. Worst case scenario is you gloss over a vulnerability and you actually get through a clearance. And now you're in a deployment and you have a vulnerability that gets taken advantage of. What happens at that point? What happens when you have a failure in the field and your reputation, you're having to do, potentially you have to do a recall, your reputation gets completely damaged from it, etc. So FDA acts as a gate to essentially help prevent that. And so trying to just circumvent the gate is not, in my opinion, the right approach. What you really need to do is convince yourselves and be able to make a cogent argument that you truly have security in place. And that doesn't mean you've closed every vulnerability, but you have other means to mitigate vulnerabilities. And you have to go through and make sure that you have those in place.
Yeah, it was say like kind of the longer you wait to fix a vulnerability or the farther down the path, the more expensive it gets. And, to Mohammed's point in setting it up the way that you did, Tom, like, let's say the FDA was fine with it, let it go through. And then there's a security event and it makes the news. Like nobody's going to care that you go, oh yeah, but in the manual in page 47, we told our users that they needed to do these 3 things to ensure the system was secure. Like what's going to be in the news is your company's name and your reputation is now, destroyed. So that's an extremely costly event. If you take a step back, if you just kind of try to wave your hands and say like, no, we're not responsible for the cybersecurity, chances are FDA is not gonna buy. Right? FDA has gotten pretty savvy when it comes to cybersecurity. It's not acceptable, to leave vulnerabilities open just because you've got in your user manual some controls that you're expecting the end user to put in place. And so now what does that mean? I mean, that could potentially delay things by 3, 6, 9 months. It could result in you having to come back and re-architect your system, redo your code, redo your verification testing, redo your penetration testing, and you realize you're not having enough time, and you're having to call Rob and say, I think we got to pull this 510K and start that process over. And something that could have been resolved, with a 2-week patch internally by your team early, instead becomes, a 9-month delay in getting to market, which, literally could have millions of dollars worth of implications to your business. So it's just not a good area to cut corners in.
Let me do a concrete follow-up just real quick on that sometimes people will miss, and it ties into the communications aspect. So, a manufacturer can build a machine and say this machine is supposed to be deployed, and large piece of equipment, for instance, a therapeutic machine, and say this is going to be deployed in a secure facility and it's completely air-gapped. It's not meant to be connected to anything. It just runs in total isolation, and they make that their security posture. Except that during the design, they place an Ethernet port on it. And the Ethernet port is right there on the back. Now, they can state in the manual it's not supposed to be connected, and that should be, in their mind, they've met that burden of transferring responsibility if it's clearly it's not connected. But what happens if it does get connected? What happens if someone does actually plug it into the network? So our position would be you test that. You just see what happens if that takes place. And if there's a serious vulnerability through Ethernet that you had never planned for because you didn't expect that someone would actually plug it in, then you have to deal with that. And dealing with it might be as simple as saying, okay, place a plate over that Ethernet port and put safety screws on it so that it can't be, it can't be mistakenly removed, for instance. Add a control that disables the thing. Have a switch on it. I mean, there are many ways to mitigate something like that, but just ignoring it and saying it's in the manual not to plug it in is not really the right security posture to take.
I like to talk with a firm like yours that actually develops software when we're trying to vet suppliers for our customers, because you actually know how to develop the software. The companies that have already developed the software for themselves but have neglected security, sort of an afterthought, which seems to be fairly typical. They come to us and they're like, well, we've done a bunch of scanning and this is rock solid, it's secure, and the company that we paid money to told us that it's true. And I'm like, okay, so when we submit it to pen testing and they give you a list of all the vulnerabilities that they found, so they won't put it. Nobody gets away with the pen testing if it was done rigorously without vulnerabilities. So when you have them, not if, when you have them, how are you going to fix them? And they have no idea. They don't even know how to do it because they outsource it all to somebody else that just did scanning. And then the second thing I really worry about is you talked a little bit about what happens if you get through the FDA and then you actually have an event, some incident where somebody's hacked your system. Well, you didn't have the resources to do an independent security test, a pen test yourself. You outsourced the scanning. You were incorrect in your assessment, obviously, now that we have an event. So you probably don't have the resources to actually respond to it. You might not even have a procedure for responding to an incident. So if you don't have a procedure, you don't have the resources, don't know how to do it, hopefully they've come to you and done their due diligence, said, yeah, this is the firm we need to help bail us out of this. They're like, it's a little late, but better late than never. So go to, if you're late to the party doing your pen testing, you're late to the party designing for security, at least hire the right firm that can actually code and develop medical devices so they can actually help you respond properly and teach you this is how you should have done it. We'll fix it now, but all your future development, this is what you need to do. And I just love working with a team that, as I like to say, a proper group of criminals. You know how to build it and hack it.
Yeah, no, you make some good points there, Robin. And what I would say too is that, if you look at the process that FDA recommends, right, essentially what they expect, it's layered in such a way that if you follow it, you shouldn't get those surprises at the end. Like, penetration testing, which by the way is not the fullness of what FDA requires for testing. They want to see penetration testing, they want to see fuzz testing, they want to see a vulnerability analysis, they want to see all that at the end. But they're guiding you to start early, to prepare security architecture views, to do the threat modeling at a very early stage so that you catch things early, long before testing. To do things like evaluate your software bill of materials so that if somebody on your team pulled the library, not realizing that it's got a bunch of vulnerabilities already associated with it, that maybe you switch it out for something that's more secure, or that you at least evaluate it to understand if it's going to have an impact on your system's security. That you have proper security controls in place and that you verify them through your standard verification testing. So, it seems like a lot of companies think that all they need to do for cybersecurity is have a pen test done at the end, and that's going to be sufficient. And if that's the first time you're thinking about cybersecurity seriously, chances are you're going to come to a company like ours. Like you said, we're going to give you a list of 10, significant issues, and now your team's going to take a long time to fix them. Versus if you started really properly planning for this from the get-go, when you come to us, there's hopefully a lot fewer, and your team already has the experience. They can resolve them. So that's the first thing I'd say about that. And then the second thing is, you're right. Like, one of the things that I think we do that is unique, and Mohammed and his team are really good at this, is that, we're not just giving you the vulnerabilities. We're saying like, here's the vulnerabilities and here's how you can address them, right? We typically try not to be the ones who are going in there and actually changing the code for our clients, because it starts to impact the, the fact that we're an independent party performing the third-party testing. But we can provide you with some guidance on, hey, if you didn't set up authentication correctly, here's what you may want to do. And here's like some resources that you can find explaining how to do that, or, if you're using the wrong kind of encryption or whatever the vulnerabilities root cause might be. You want a partner who can give you a little bit of guidance so your team isn't all of a sudden just going, oh no, like we've got these problems, we have no clue where to start.
Every single company that I've audited over the years has a supplier quality management procedure. And they all look like they were copied at some point from GE. Where's your ISO cert? Are you registered with the FDA? Can I see your quality manual? And could you please fill out this 17-page survey? And so I've gone on record on what is wrong with that and how you could just tweak a little bit and make it a whole lot better. But ignoring those 4 really horrible ways to evaluate a supplier, what's the best question that you've asked a supplier for security, or been asked when somebody was vetting you as a supplier for security, that you thought it was like, damn, that's a good question to ask about vetting a supplier for security?
Do you want me to jump in?
Yeah, go for it.
I was going to say, so I kind of roll back. Again, and we're focusing here on a supplier for security for medical device. I think that having ISO 13485 and going through the audits required and having the QMS, et cetera, all of that is in my mind just table stakes. That you should have that in place. It gives you a starting point to understand that supplier at least has understanding of the overall approach. Having team members that understand 62304 and how medical device software is developed is another important aspect of it, and that these both come out through audits.
Yep.
So that's the first thing, and then again, sort of additional to that is obviously if you've got this grounding, you've got probably team members that understand 14971 as well and have gone through risk analysis and understand how to manage that. So those are just the standards. And again, I say all of those things are table stakes. You probably want to start there and say, does this firm have these things and understands this? From there, you start looking at the domain expertise. I'm building an embedded device. Does the team have anyone there that understands embedded devices? I'm doing and go to the other extreme, a SAMD cloud. Do they understand? Do they have knowledge and understanding of cloud-based systems? And then in the middle would be something like applications. And so it's now you're focusing there, and you may not need someone that has all of those things because your product may not need all those things. But that's where you got to go next, is look at the domain expertise of the team. And then from there, it gets to the more detailed sort of understanding of tools, techniques. How is this team? Do they have clear? How many devices have they cleared? Do they have? There's other information like that. When was their most recent clearance? I'm just going off the top of my head now, but things around how do they handle SBOMs, and can they assist us with creating SBOMs? Because that's one that we oftentimes get. Those types of things. So this just you're slowly building up a profile of your partner and seeing where do they fill in the holes that I have, essentially, and in all these things.
And do they have experience with similar devices?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah. And one of the things that's kind of interesting, we were talking about this with Mohammed the other day, is that once you've done enough of these, we've done many dozens of these at this point, you kind of start to recognize the patterns. Like they sort of fall into different buckets. You'll get your just standard embedded device that's a single microcontroller, and that's one thing. And then you've got your more sophisticated systems. Like you might have a medical device implant with a reader, and they're communicating through ISM or BLE, and then you've got that reader talking to a phone, and that's through, DLE typically, and then you've got the phone and it's connected to the cloud, and then that cloud is connected to, some dashboard that a clinician might be looking at. There's a portal for them, and you've got admins, and so you can get pretty sophisticated systems. At the end of the day, though, the architectures start to look fairly similar. I know that with some of our clients who've told us in the past, like, hey, we ended up choosing you guys for this reason. It was the fact that we've developed pretty much every type of system like that. So even though CyberMed focuses on cybersecurity support for medical device companies, our team is primarily composed of people who have been involved in the development of medical devices, and we've done pretty much every flavor you can think of at this point. And so we're able to look at it not strictly, it's not like an IT person would look at cybersecurity. It's more like how a development team that's developed secure systems would look at it. And so it creates a level of ability to communicate with their team that isn't always there with firms that are more strictly come from an IT security background. So I think, yeah, that's sort of one of the questions that comes up sometimes, like, you guys actually have experience developing devices like this, that I found it to be something that helps us stand out at least.
I agree. That's important. Tom, you have anything?
Nothing else to add to that topic, no.
Okay. What are the biggest weaknesses or most common weaknesses that you see from your testing? Is there one that this is the biggest weakness, or this is the most common weakness that we see?
So I'll break it up. I think at the local link level, so if you're looking at a small embedded device communicating with an app, etc., just at that local link level, I think the biggest weakness I see is the sort of the rationale that people take that say, well, this is just a local link, so I don't need to worry about its security. And so, we do see a fair share of completely insecure local links. And that's something that FDA particularly looks for. So we've seen them both in clients that come to us just initially before they even submitted, and we see it in a fair share of them come back as people that have tried to submit and get rejected and then have to deal with it. So that's and I think that just stems from this sort of, maybe there's a sort of historical sort of concept that if it's local, then it doesn't need to be secure, and I can sort of trust the environment around it. We see that quite a lot.
Yeah, specifically there, just, if you're listening and you don't know precisely what local link is, I mean, think Bluetooth, think USB, think Wi-Fi, right? I mean, we see a lot of stuff around Bluetooth. We've had devices come to us where they're like, yeah, we've secured it, we're ready to submit, and our team breaks in through the Bluetooth like in seconds, because there's like literally no security there. So that's a very common one, and it's one that FDA is very sensitive to.
So yeah, so that's on the local link. I think the next one up would be, I think, recognition and understanding that when you're running, so there's sort of two modes here. If you develop an app that's going to run on a mobile device, you kind of believe the app is secure because it's my app, I can control it. Except that you're running in a completely unknown, insecure environment. So the reality is people come sort of assuming that it's secure, and then you got to start thinking about, well, okay, your app is actually writing stuff out to the phone storage, well, and it's not securing it in any way. So anybody that has access to that phone or any other app on that phone can access that same data. So it can change it, it can manipulate it as it needs to. So there's sort of the understanding of the environment that you're in. I think people misconstrue that. And then I guess the third, so that's on the sort of the middle ground. And then the third part, and this one we don't see quite as much, but it's starting to happen, is it's going to involve more sort of cloud-based AI that we're starting to see more of, which is that basically, again, it's a question of how do you ensure the integrity of the information coming to you from that AI party, and so it's sort of a twofold problem, which is you're dealing with a service that you don't control, and how do you ensure that that the service that you're using is the one that you expect to be using, and that the results that it's producing are based on the inputs that you provided and not something else. So it's a question of, again, the information flow across systems and how you can control it. And so there's again, it's starting to become more important from a medical device perspective to worry about those types of things. And so it's in sort of summary, a lot of the security problems are stemming from misassumptions. People come in with sort of a set of assumptions that, maybe those assumptions were valid at some point in the past, but they certainly are not valid anymore. And they sort of stick to those assumptions and think, well, we're secure because those assumptions are true. And then as we analyze them, we reveal that those assumptions simply are not true. And so, you're far less secure than you believe you are. And it can be a surprise to people sometimes, but it is what it is.
If you have a vulnerability that there's not something we can fix right now, maybe it's part of the soup that you've got in your system, it's on that bomb, it's not your software, but it's integral to your software, and it's a known vulnerability, how can you handle that in terms of justifying it, and also what kind of additional security can you put around it?
Actually, if you don't mind, let me jump on that in a slightly different way, because I think there's an even more pressing problem that this is probably the number one thing that we see everybody's surprised by when it comes to third party. Mm-hmm. FDA requires you to, so we have SBOMs, and they break down your product, including all the components that from third party potentially that you're using. And you have to submit that to FDA in actually electronic format. And you can scan those for vulnerabilities. But in addition, FDA actually asks you also for a level of support assessment for all of the components that you're using. And this is the one that actually we find surprises most people, which is when you actually do a detailed analysis, and we've developed a whole methodology around it that we do it consistently for all projects. You'll suddenly discover that a lot of the components, and this ties into your question, a lot of the components that you're using are no longer supported. They're out of support. They're literally, and it's very true for medical devices, because oftentimes medical devices are on a much longer development cycle. You could be using third-party components from 12 months ago or 18 months ago, which at the time you started using them were probably okay, but now they're completely out of support. They've just moved on. And this is very true of open source, because open source, they don't have this requirement to keep maintaining everything from the past. And so oftentimes what we'll see this confluence of, and again, we have a methodology where we merge the two things together. So we'll look at vulnerabilities. We'll also look at level of support. And what we try to pull out is those vulnerabilities in components that are completely out of support. Because if you have a vulnerability in a component that's totally out of support, it's on you. That there is no one is going to fix it. There is no fix, because whoever produced that has just moved on and abandoned it effectively. Yeah. And so when you're looking at vulnerabilities and how to deal with them, it's starting there at that understanding of how now it may be that the simple answer is just upgrade to a newer component version of that third-party piece, and the vulnerability goes away. And so you kill two birds with one stone. You deal with the support issue and you deal with the vulnerability. So I think so we look at this holistically, not just as a single vulnerability in a component, but how does that component fit within the level of support landscape, and where should you be going to deal with these problems? But just closing out, if it is a vulnerability in a supported item and for some reason the supporter has not yet updated it and there is no easy way for you to acquire an update, then you have to fall back on, you replace it, do you, is there some, if you're ready to submit, and this happens at the end, which is sort of not what you want to hear, are there, again, compensating controls you can use? Are there ways that you can make the vulnerability not be as applicable to you as it may have been in the original component? And so it's understanding how does that vulnerability manifest itself in your product? Are there ways that you can circumvent it in your product, because you just can't fix it in the third party itself? Sorry, long-winded answer, but I hope that.
No, it's good, because we've actually had a couple of submissions where we the client did not follow our recommendation for the cybersecurity testing. And then when they submitted, they had an operating system that was past the end of support date for that operating system. And we pointed that out to them and showed them the language in the eStar where it says, this will not be accepted, and this will be a deficiency that you will get put on hold right away. And they didn't believe us. And 15 days later, here you go. Here's your told you so t-shirt,
Well,
you have joined the club.
it actually
So we
surprised.
reset to 0 days and start all over again.
Yeah, it actually surprised. That surprised. It actually. I've seen similar things, Rob, and I'm oftentimes surprised. And again, maybe this is just the way it used to be. I'm oftentimes surprised by why it is that people don't take the FDA seriously in what they state are the
Well, maybe they'll miss it. Maybe they'll be blind to the fact that we've typed in the revision number and the date, and it was expired 10 years ago.
The thing is that I think what people don't, and we see this because we're observing this all the time. This is the other thing is that when you pick a firm that has a track record of submissions and is watching and doing this work and seeing how things evolve, and over an 18-month period, we've probably shifted our approach every 3-4 months based on what we see as continuous feedback from FDA. Where are they focusing? Where are they? And it hasn't been consistent. For instance, I mentioned level of support. A year ago, they probably were not focusing that much on it. But we've noticed a general progression where they have started to emphasize that more and more, as an example. And so I think understanding where, and they have tools and they have techniques and they're constantly evolving too. So you can't just sort of go by, well, somebody told me that this is what they used to do 2 years ago, and so I'm just going to do that. FDA themselves are continuing to evolve and improve their screening and what they're looking for. They're sticking to the guidance, obviously, and the guidance itself has migrated a little bit since September 2023, but not too much substantially. But still, they are continuing to increase scrutiny, not reduce it. And so I think it's a mistake for someone to sort of believe that, well, we filled in the information, it's good enough, and reviewers just going to look at it and say, yeah, it's okay. You checked the right boxes and you wrote a few words here and there, and that's enough. It really isn't. Or at least from our experience, it hasn't been.
And we get the benefit that some proportion of our clients come to us after they've submitted to FDA, which is, it's usually they get 13, 14 deficiencies.
I can't redesign this, but I gotta help them.
Yeah, they arrive with their hair on fire, like, oh crap, we got FDA wants a response within 2 weeks to why we've got these deficiencies. So we get to see a lot of the deficiencies that happen when teams don't take the proper steps in preparation. And yeah, as Mohammed has said, and FDA was clear about this when they started with the first version of the guidance and then had the final version. And then, they said, like, look, we're going to get more and more strict over time. And that's precisely what we've seen, is that there's sort of a grace period in 2024, but that's long past, and they continue to get more and more strict. It's also fairly clear that the first pass of review is happening through their AI system, and so it's quite rigorous, right? And there's certain things that are just going to immediately raise flags. Now, you try to be empathetic towards some of these companies submitting, right? Sometimes you look at that company, maybe they started developing it 10 years ago when that operating system was just fine, and they're looking at a very tough decision of, like, do we go back and redesign everything now? Like, maybe we'll take our chances. So, sometimes you understand why they do it, but if you've seen it enough, like, this might fly, this won't fly, you're good here. I think that's where, the value of, like, that's how I feel about you, Rob. Like, I know people work with you on the regulatory side, and it's like the tremendous amount of value you bring is just the volume that you do, because you've seen everything at this point. So you have a very good sense for what FDA is gonna.
I can take out here's what we had from the last client that did what you're trying to do, and I'll just black out their name, and here you go. This is what you'll see in 15 days. And
I also want to
if it's a smaller thing, here's what you'll see in 60 days.
And,
I
and,
just want to
and
add a call out too that Jose and Cybermed put out a lot of great content, and you're saying that you like to guide your clients, and you offer a lot of great free information. So if you're not connected with Jose and Muhammad on LinkedIn, or if you're not visiting their website, I strongly encourage it. I know, Jose, you put out wonderful articles on this is encryption, this is the way that public keys work. And then you're great with your comments too. I've asked you a couple of questions there on technical clarifications, and you respond right away. I really appreciate that guidance and support.
Yeah, and I've had your name come up about 3 times this week already. Where like, yeah, I work with Jose, and so
Oh, awesome. Appreciate
yeah,
that. Yeah. Yeah, that's, I mean, honestly, in some ways, I've tried to follow Rob's lead on that, because I know over the years with like even your company name, I think is brilliant, right? Because there's an element of, most of us in this industry are doing it because we have an element of purpose and mission, right? We want to see patients get good products that are going to help them. I got 6 kids, which I think Rob, you do as well, and
yeah.
so like when you go to the hospital with your kid, you want to know that the equipment that's being used to treat them or to diagnose them is secure and it's safe and it's going to work and all of that. I think a lot of people in the medical device industry are very mission driven like that. So, whether people come work with us or not, we want them to know how to properly secure the devices. We're usually brought in a little bit later. So if they've made poor decisions early, that doesn't help anybody. That doesn't help us. That doesn't help them. So we do try to do some education so that people hopefully can take the proper steps early. But yeah, I appreciate you saying that, Tom.
Yeah, we've actually got an intro slide to software as a medical device and embedded systems, and I take that diagram that you have that shows the V diagram and shows the cybersecurity, and it's a big spaghetti of all these different things that you have to do, but it's got your picture there. It says call these guys if you need help, because we have a lot of companies that just they don't have 62304 experience in house, and they outsource development to somebody that doesn't know medical device, and there's no way they can get from where they are to where they need to be without redesign.
I know we've talked a lot, Rob, and a lot of the questions sort of were more around the lens of, somebody has problems and how to deal with the problems that they've got, and especially if it's very late, et cetera. I would like to think that out of this conversation, one maybe important takeaway is not to get yourself into that situation. Get ahead of the curve. Get the right partner involved early enough so that they're involved at your architecture phase even, and you lay down the right security architecture and you put in place the right controls and you have all the things in the right place and you perform your vulnerability analysis and cybersecurity testing at the right point. And if you do that, it can actually be a very smooth experience, and you don't have to have all of the pain that that we've probably brought out a lot in this conversation. But I just don't want people to think that it's always going to be painful. In reality, there is a smooth path if the right decisions are made, early enough.
If you design your controls as requirements for your software at the same time you said it was going to, what the essential performance was going to be, and the same time you said what the indications for use are going to be, and you said, well, when I decided whether it's class A, B, or C, that was when I also created a security diagram and did a threat model. You're doing an awesome job. That's the time to do it. Way back then, a year ago.
Yeah, and we work alongside clients through their projects too. I mean, we do get our fair share of ones that, as Jose said, that come along after they've submitted and then they're looking for someone to help them, and we help them. There is that segment, but it's also very enjoyable to work on with clients right at the beginning where they're laying everything down and you can see a product evolving, and you've steered them the right way and they don't have any of these issues. So I think it's just saying that there can be a pleasant experience. It doesn't have to be that painful.
Okay.
And without opening a can of worms here at the top of the hour when we're wrapping things up, I would say too, like from a leadership standpoint, right? If somebody watching this is in the leadership of their organization, like you want to build this into your culture. Here's the can of worms that maybe we can discuss in another episode at some point. With the advent of AI, If you haven't been following, there have been 2 or 3 major cybersecurity events led by, essentially executed by AI agents inadvertently, like without a threat actor who's purposefully trying to cause this. So there was an event with Hugging Face, you can look that up, where an OpenAI agent hacked them without anybody telling it to. Anthropic has reported that 3 companies got hacked by their model that they were training internally. My point is that the level and the scale of cybersecurity threats that are going to start arising here in the next year or two is unprecedented. And so this isn't just a question of getting FDA clearance. Like, we're entering into an era where there's just going to be a lot more cybersecurity risk, and you don't want your device to fall, prey to that. So it's you kind of want to build that into your culture early, so you take those steps.
I was using an AI agent last night, and I was able to get things I didn't think were retrievable. Like I got all kinds of information about a company's adverse events and complaints and warning letters. Like, there's no way I should have access to this. Where is it coming from? Yeah, Claude just gave it to me on a silver platter and created the slide deck.
Yeah, it's tremendous.
But yeah, that
thank
was
you very much.
Yep.
Thank you very much. We got to get going, but we'd love to have you back, and we will continue to work with you guys. Tom is somebody that can help the clients with the documentation, but we're not going to write the code for them, and we don't do the pen testing, and we're just really there to help you prepare your submissions and help you develop your medical device. And we don't hesitate to outsource work and recommend you guys, because you're going to do a fantastic job. And Tom is not an entire firm that can do this. He is one person that can give you the right questions to ask and help you make the right decision on which vendor to hire.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having us on, Rob. Always enjoy it. Always appreciate what you guys do at the Medical Device Academy.
Thank you.
Awesome.
It's a pleasure working with you too. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.